So good morning again. We are back to the book Liberation. Last month we started the book. Well, actually we started a couple of months ago. We did the introduction, which is the beautiful little story of the little red fish. And then we did the introduction, the chapter 1, which was a lecture by Minister Flaccus, which is a minister of one of the departments of Nosso Lar, when he was talking about the lower zones and the spirits that inhabit the lower zones and their reasons and their motivations and the struggle that they face and the assistance from the spiritual world, the spiritual benefactors to those regions. Chapter 2 is a conversation with the instructor. You know that in the books of Andre Luiz, there is always an instructor that directs the excursions that they do to the spiritual world, physical world. And in this book, in this particular book, Liberation, his name is Gubbio. We were introduced to him in the very beginning of chapter 1. When he was sitting with Andre Luiz and Eloy, which is normally not all books, but most of the books, Andre Luiz has also a companion that we get to know and that is always with him. And in this book, his name is Eloy. So it's Eloy, Andre Luiz, and Instructor Gubbio. So in this chapter, it will be a conversation with the instructor, which will be Gubbio talking a little bit about what lies ahead for them. Okay, so Zoraida, you're going to read for us?
Yes, of course. Okay, a conversation with the instructor. When we left the educational establishment, Instructor Gubbio looked at Elio, our companion, and at me with his lucid eyes and said, "It's hard for a lot of people to understand the intelligent regimentation of evil spirits. Nevertheless, is logical and natural. If we are still a long ways from holiness in spite of the lofty purposes that have been guiding us, what can be said about the miserable brothers and sisters who have willingly let themselves be caught in the web of ignorance and wickedness? They have the fact that there is a region that is higher than the physical spheres, to which they are still bound by strong ties. Since they're entangled in forces of a low vibrational level, they cannot grasp the beauty of the higher life. And as fragile, sick mentalities bow down in humiliation, the spirits of impiety impose their rule on them. They organize them with large communities and guide them on dark foundations of hatred and quiet desperation. They organize venerable cities that house huge phalanxes of souls who, ashamed of themselves, flee before any manifestations of the divine light. Children of rebellion and darkness gather there by thousands, seeking self-preservation and supporting one another. Perceiving our obvious surprise, the instructor continued in response to our inner inquiries. Such troubled colonies must have started when the first earthly intelligence began indulging in disobedience and rebelliousness before the decrees of heavenly paternity. The soul that has fallen into unharmonious vibrations by abusing the freedom that was entrusted to it must weave the threads of its own readjustment. But millions of our lazy, impediment brothers and sisters refuse to undertake such an endeavor, prolonging the maze in which they often remained lost for centuries. They are incapable of making the urgent journey to heaven because of the destructive passions that magnetize them. And in accordance with the inferior tendencies they have in common, they band together close to the earth's surface, whose inferior emanations and lives continue to nourish them in the same way that it nourishes incarnates. The main objective of these dark harmonies armies, is to conserve the mental backwardness of the human being so that that planet will remain under their tyrannical yoke as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. So you see that I'm underlining some important phrases here. I started doing this when I was preparing this class. I thought it was important for me to remember and to call your attention also.
Mhm.
So Gubbio, so for those that don't know much about this book, Liberation is a book by Francisco Xavier from the Spirit Andre Luiz, and Andre Luiz describes an excursion to the deep lower zones to rescue a spirit that is the main leader of one of these large communities of the lower zones. His name is Gregorio. He was a former pope in a previous incarnation. I think Gregory, I don't remember which number, 9 or 8, or I don't know. So as they are preparing for this excursion, and if you remember from the previous book we just finished, Andre Luiz wasn't allowed to go into the caverns when he met his grandfather and he helped rescue his grandfather. But he was told he was not prepared yet to go to the deep lower zones because of it would be too much for him. So in this book, that is some time after the other in terms of his life in the spiritual world, he's better prepared, and that's when they are going to go down there. So Gubbio, who is going to be the leader of this rescue mission, is the one that is going to guide them. But before they go, he starts to describe the reason for these regions to exist. So when we talk about the lower zones, we have different levels of the lower zones also. Like we have different levels of the higher spheres, and you have the type of colonies like Nosular, which is the first level of organized colonies. You have above Nosular other more evolved colonies. So in the lower zones, you have different levels of congregations of spirits according to their mental vibration, and some of these areas, deeper areas, are more organized in the sense that they have a leader and they have someone that runs the show, so to say, because of their intellectual abilities, not the moral. Because of course there is no moral evolution there in the lower zones, right, in these dark places. Mm-hmm. But there is some spirits that are more intellectually better prepared than others, and they are, because of their ability of leadership and other things, they are the leaders of these lower zones. So he talks here about how these suffering brothers and sisters end up in a place like that. Say that the spiritual world is a continuation of our physical life. Actually, it's a continuum. We are eternal spirits, so we live there and here alternatively. And as we go back to the spiritual world, we take with us our moral and intellectual progress, and we don't gain anything. And we don't lose anything beyond our physical body. We just lose our physical body, we continue to be the same. So for spirits that are vibrating in lower mental vibrations in terms of materialistic thoughts, desires of hatred, vengeance, or they leave the physical world because of something that happened to them because of others, let's say, they can carry this hatred, they can carry this desire of vengeance, and they will find themselves in these places where sometimes when they find a leader that tells them, we are going to help you achieve your vengeance, they will follow these leaders. So what he's saying here, that they are entangled in forces of low vibrational level. They cannot understand that there is something better, and they organize themselves in communities, and these communities are united in what? Hatred, desperation, with souls that cannot understand that there is a possibility of divine light, right? So children of rebellion and darkness gather there by the thousands. We talked about this last week on the Q&A session when Luis asked, how many spirits do I think there are in the spiritual world that are living in these places compared to organized societies, and I gave an answer which was a speculation that because we are moving into a world of regeneration where good prevails over evil, I tend to think that we have more spirits in the organized helpful colonies like Nosso Lar than in the lower zones, but still a very large number in the lower zones. And according to the book On the Way to the World of Regeneration, the latest book published by Divaldo, the spirits are removing large parts of these colonies, these very low colonies with spirits that no longer can stay here on Earth, to more primitive planets. So Gubbio talks about the beginning of these colonies. Of course, they started in the very beginning when using our free will, we start deviating from the divine path, from the path that would lead us towards moral and intellectual progress. Because in our path of evolution, we learn through our trials, to overcoming our trials, and by making mistakes and learning from our mistakes. When we don't learn from our mistakes and we repeat them is when we create karma, we create consequences for our actions, and that's when we deliberately deviate from the divine justice, is when we create this in disobedience and rebelliousness, we create these colonies united by spirits that vibrate like us, that think like us. So I underline here, well, before I go there, these spirits, as Gubbio says here, millions of lazy, impenitent brothers that refuse to undertake the change to the light. They are incapable of making the urgent journey to heaven because of their destructive passions. When you are thinking about destroying others, vengeance, hatred, you don't have time to think about the positive solutions for your problems. And again, remember, this is spirits that are vibrating at a very low level. And we are going to see the difference between this and a place where Andre Luiz found himself in the beginning of Nosso Lar, in the next part that we're going to read. So these are armies of inferior spirits whose main objective is to conserve the mental backwardness of human being so that the planet will remain under the tyrannical yoke as much as possible. Why is that? Well, it's simple as misery loves company, right? They are living in misery. They won't admit that, but they are suffering with their struggles and their hatred and their desires of vengeance. And they want all the world to be like they are. Because if the world starts to evolve, they will need to change. They will need to find another place. They will need to change their mental disposition, and they are not ready, not prepared, and not willing to do so. So their objective is to act on our inferior tendencies to keep us incarnates and also the discarnates in the same wavelength that they are vibrating, so they can keep control of their armies and of those under their influence. Okay. Questions, comments here?
Yeah, on the previous page, if you can go back, when it says such robot colonies must have started when the first earthly intelligences began indulging in disobedience and rebelliousness. How that is similar to the Catholic origin of hell, way to the descent of Lucifer, right to the fall of the angel. It goes pretty, the parable of the Catholic goes pretty much together with this statement here.
Yeah, that's true. Again, where does the hell concept comes from, right? Comes from our own
Yep.
our own experiences in the spiritual world, in a sense, right? Okay, thanks, Elmo. Anyone else?
Another thing is on the what you have underlined over there is a very common statement in our mediumship meetings when they keep saying that we are men of us and we have control of you. We're going to take all of you to our side and stuff like that. Is a very common thing that we hear in our meetings also.
Yeah. Please.
No, I wasn't going to say something, but I just want to corroborate what Elmo just said. It's very common to hear that in our mediumship meetings as well. And I probably think it's not only because misery likes misery, but also there's a power thing. They exercise power when they influence us in their ways. So they also like this exercise of power. That's what I feel from their manifestation in our mediumship meetings.
I agree 1%. And one thing that I always imagine is you see those individuals who are the drug lords, drug leaders in the favelas, in the subworld. They have all the power, they have all the money, but they are confined in that micro universe of in reality of misery. They have all the power, but they are confined in misery because they cannot get out of there and live a normal life where they would be one of us. They must have the power. They must be in the position of leadership, even if it puts them in a position of living a marginalized life. You see that with gang members, gang leaders, drug dealers, drug gangs. It really seems to me a question of power, a pure pride.
Yeah, and you can imagine that those, when they go back to the spiritual world, they don't change, so they continue to want the positions of power, the positions of leadership, and that they will find that in the lower zone spirits that will follow them, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
if I might make a meta comment, a comment about what we are talking. I've never been to your meetings. You've never been to my meetings here. And we are exposing very, very similar experiences. And I believe that's what Kardec felt, 100 and something years ago, when he started to notice that the same thing happened in different places, and that must be, that's a supporting reality that cannot be denied. This is strength of Spiritism is fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we can make a parallel just made now of the life in the spiritual world and the life in the physical world, you can say that it's just a continuation. It's not that much difference. The difference is the absence of a physical body, really.
Yeah. And that's what I said I tried to say in the beginning, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, life in the physical world and the spiritual world is our eternal life. It's just the difference, we don't have a physical body, but the desires and the issues are the same, right? Continue to be the same. Of course, there are changes because the trauma of the discarnation can affect people in different ways. So whenever you go through a trauma here, an accident or a traumatic experience, something changes in you in different ways. And when you go back to the spiritual world, sometimes the shock of the loss of the physical body and the new reality that you are faced can make things change. But that's not, it's not going to be a sudden change and a complete 180-degree change. It's going to be subtle changes that may change your view on some things, but you continue to be you, right? It doesn't change who you are.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's continue, Soraya.
Gubiro's comments seared my mind. I myself have spent time in the lower rims of life after corporeal death. However, I had never come across such organized condensations of evil entities in the spirit realm, although I did hear astonishing references to them on several occasions. In fact, I had not been able to rid myself of all my memories of that awful time that the door of the grave had opened to me. I remembered having been pursued across large marshy areas, tormented and wrenched. I had wandered in misery for what seemed like days and nights on end. Nevertheless, I could not grasp the fact that evil activities had some sort of guiding organism. Consequently, with my mind now focused on the aims of the good, I ventured 2 acts. After death and divested of their heavy garment of flesh, why can't such backward legions see better than ever that they're fighting a battle that they can never win? They transported to the plane of pure enlightenment. Can't they grasp their situation? Aren't they surrounded by the most sublime revelations of nature? Don't they realize how much better, edifying, and worthwhile study would be in the lofty aspiration of attending sanctifying knowledge? Why do they congregate like that in despicable and diabolical crowds? Is it easy to understand that the evolutionary journey of the human being continues after the grave, but deliberately postponing it due to cruelty and hatred would baffle any mind? The guide smiled politely and explained, "We are talking about spirits who are perfectly human, in spite of being discarded in such questions, Andre, may even be asked regarding the physical realm. Before awakening our consciousness to divine revelation, why did we ourselves stay bound to the lower spheres every day, transgressing the law so spectacularly? After all, the blessed flood of sunlight pouring down incessantly from infinite space was right there in front of us. We knew that the existence of our body would be brief, that we would have to face death like everyone else, that we would have to return from the physical world to the same mysterious doorway we had used when we entered it. Even so, how many times did we disdain the sublime wisdom with our attitude of criminal indifference? In light of the suggestions from the divine plane that now inhabit your mind, do you recall any time in the past when you truly thought about your own sublimation? If we unearth our past, my dear fellow, we will uncover deplorable memories, but we must neither stop nor get discouraged. Like the fragile shoot, we must grow by reaching for the air above us. And in spite of the shackles that bind us, just like the humble tree that is bound to the remains of the complex envelope that used to contain its seed, we must rise to the pure air and broadness of conditions so that we may produce the good the Lord expects from us.
Okay, thanks. So First, Andre Luiz talks a little bit, if you remember, from the beginning of Nosso Lar, which is the first book of the collection, Andre Luiz, Life in the Spiritual World. Andre Luiz comments in that book his experiences in the lower zones where he spent 8 years in a state of confusion, in a state of suffering without understanding and reflecting what was going on with him, trying to escape from spirits that were mocking him, that were accusing him, and his struggle in sleeping in caves, and what he's saying here is that the place that he was in the lower zones didn't at all seem like organized places lead by some sort of evil leaders, because he was not in those places. He was in a place in the lower zones where you have there are spirits there that are a little bit more evolved than those that we are going to find in this book, in the sense that they are just disoriented. They don't have hatred in their hearts. They don't have desires of vengeance. They don't have obsessive thoughts. What they have is confusion, lack of understanding of the spiritual world, and lack of a positive spirituality. It's just those that were focused on the physical life. They didn't do anything bad per se, but they didn't really focus on their spiritual progress. They focused on their material life. They were living their lives. They have no reason to hate anybody, or they have no reason to desire any vengeance. Like Andre Luiz, we learn a little bit about his life. He was a doctor. He helped people, some. He didn't help others. He missed opportunities. He engaged in material pleasures that caused him to be sick, ended up causing his death through cancer. He had the cancer of the intestine. So, a typical life of someone that lives life in the physical world without many focus or concern about the spiritual world, but without being a bad person per se, in the sense that we call here. So this type of spirits, they end up in the place like Andre Luiz ended up for a time, until they find in themselves a sincere desire to ask for help, because help is always there. Help is always available to us. The fact that we don't open ourselves to be helped is the problem. So it took Andre Luiz 8 years to finally get to the bottom of it and ask for help. And he was helped and assisted. But the place that he was not a place of the lower zones, of the caverns, or organized places, because the spirits that were there were spirits like him that wouldn't listen to a spirit that was trying to lead him into wars of vengeance or wars of destruction, because he was not interested in that, Andre Luiz. He was interested in understanding what was happening to him, why he was suffering, why he was in that awful place. But he wasn't, he was just hiding from those spirits that were trying to talk him something of him. So that's the difference here, what Andre Luiz is trying to tell us. And if you remember when Julio used to say, right, the good thing about Andre Luiz is that he asked the question that we would like to ask, right? So here he says, so these people, after they die, why can't they see that, it's a battle they can never win? Why then they can understand about their situation? So they go back to the spiritual world. They know that the life continues. They know they are in the lower zones or in these difficult places. Why they don't realize that there's a better way out of it? Why they congregate in this place? So all questions that we ask ourselves, right, when we are studying Spiritism and we first enter into contact with the realities of the spiritual world, we keep asking why these spirits don't change, why they go when they go back to the spiritual world. They see that there is life continues. Why don't they change? And Gubbio says, really, you're just humans. So if we don't concern ourselves here on earth with the spirituality and the realities of a more evolved place for us, this doesn't change when we go back to the spiritual world. We live here. Like Gubbio says, we know that our existence is finite, that we're going to die. And very few of us really focus on what happens after we go back to the spiritual world. What are we building here for our return to the spiritual world? We are too focused on our earthly issues, earthly problems, that we are not focusing on the spiritual world. So when we go back there, what we do, we continue with the same thoughts, we continue with our worries. It's just that, what we left behind, we are concerned on what we left behind. And we see exactly, if you remember Andre Luiz's grandfather, he was there in the spiritual world for I don't know how many years, 30, 40 years, concerned about the money that he left behind, the earthly possessions. He couldn't deviate his mind from his earthly possessions. So Gubbio says, the recipe here, we must grow by reaching for the air above us, in spite of the shackles that bind us. We must rise to the pure air and broadness of conditions so that we may produce the good the Lord expects from us. So what he's saying here is to each one according to their own thoughts, their own vibrations. So we'll find ourselves where our mind takes us. That's what we always say about going back to the spiritual world, right? Comments here? Questions? No? Yes, Carol.
Thank you, John. Would that mean, in other words, we would sort of stay hovering nearest the places that we are living at this moment, or would we roam to find the vibration, or we wouldn't even have a choice, I guess. We would just match that vibration. So if I pass in New York, I would hover around New York. Would that be the case, do you think?
Yeah, well, depends. Each one is a case, right? But for those that, let's say, you lived your whole life in New York, you're attached to everything that is connected to New York, and you have no understanding of the spiritual world and no spiritual evolution in terms of going to a better place. Yes, you stay close to the things that are important to you, that were important to you in your previous life. Sometimes without even being completely conscious that you have gone back to the spiritual world, without understanding that you have your physical body has died. So yes, many people will stay close to the place that they were living. Remember the movie The Others, right? That's the best explanation. They stayed in the house that they lived because they didn't know any other reality, and that's what they were used to. So depends on each one. So spirits, for instance, Andre Luiz, he went to a place, he was still above Rio de Janeiro where he lived, and Nosso Lar is a spiritual colony above the city of Rio de Janeiro, but he was not specifically in any place in Rio. He was in the lower zones above Rio, but not connected specifically to where he lived, because he didn't have any strong connection to any particular place. He was looking for his family, but he couldn't connect to his family because they were not connecting with him, as we find later in the book. So that's why he was kind of lost in these dark places. But yes, we will we'll find ourselves where our mind takes us. And if our mind takes us to some place that we're comfortable living, and we are very much attached, that's where we're going to stay.
Oh, thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, anyone else? Okay, so Andre Luiz continues questioning Gubbio.
Okay. Gubbio's arguments were wonderful and suggestive, but I still have problems accepting the idea of managed purgatories and hells. I agreed with what you were saying, I said respectfully, but such ignorance that keeps us deluded beyond the body is almost incredible. The grave opens a new pathway to all of us. It is reasonable that the troubled mind must endure the pain of readjustment until it recovers. But a discarnate spirit taking control of certain sections of that pathway, as if it were their absolute master, in order to continue its tyranny, is something that I just can't grasp. Yes, replied the guide convincingly, for someone who has thought long and hard about the subject, but in a way that is contrary to reality, the idea is quite surprising. However, I see no obstacles to grasping the lesson. For example, we know that the ordinary human beings went through the evolutionary stage of irrationality thousands of years ago. Yet on many occasions, they still display behavior that is beneath them. Impressing a grave tone on his pleasant and fraternal voice, he added, we must bear in mind that we discarnates live in a field of matter characterized by a specific, though ratified, density when compared to our old physical forms, that our mind, whether we are on the earth or here, is a psychic center of attraction and repulsion. The incarnate spirit lives in a zone of slower vibrations, confined to a vehicle made up of trillions of cells that are microscopic, lives in and of themselves. Each, I'm sorry, microscopic lives in and of themselves. Each life, however, no matter how insignificant, possesses a special magnetic quality. In spite of being conditioned by cosmic or moral laws, the will controls a community of living corpuses that serve it for a limited time, much like the electrician who connects the power coming from the substation for activities in a swamp or a tower. Since each of us is an intelligent power holding creative faculties and acting within the universe, we are continuously generating psychological agents through mental energy, which exteriorizes our thoughts, and with it, we create positive courses whose effects may be near or far from their point of origin. If we choose not to use our will, we will invariably be pawns of predominant circumstances surrounding us. But as soon as we do choose to use it, we must resolve the problem of directing it, because our personal states reflect our inner choices. There are principles, forces, and laws in the microscopic universe as well as in the macrocosmic one. If someone directs his or her will toward the idea of sickness and disease, it will respond to the appeal with all the characteristics of the patterns structured by diseased thought, since a mental suggestion instills affinity and receptivity in the organic region according to the impulse. And in obedience to inner orders repeatedly received, the microbes that live and reproduce in the mental fields of the millions of persons who nurtured them will then rush en masse into the cells that attract them, forming in the body the visualized infirmity. Of course, with regard to this matter, there is the issue of necessary trials involving cases in which each individual is reborn in answer to the demands of exploratory lessons. But even then, the problem of mental connection is infinitely important, because the sick person who takes pleasure in the acceptance and praise of his or her decadence ends up as an excellent incubator of bacteria and morbid symptoms. On the other hand, when the spirit undergoing readjustment fights bravely against the ill, even if it is beneficial and deserved, it finds plentiful resources to focus on the good and to enter the stream of life victorious.
Okay, so Andre Luiz still have questions, right? So he says, well, but when we die, when the grave opens a new pathway for us, we have to go through the readjustment. He's talking about himself. He spent 8 years in this pain of readjustment. But what he doesn't understand is how some spirits take control of it, right? Use their power to control. That's something that he can't understand. And Gubbio talks a little bit, goes about the mind, right? How we think and how our mind plays the role. And again, if we think about what Elmo said earlier, right? The leaders of the gangs, the leader of even the leaders of let's say countries that are focused in absolute domination of their people, that imposes restrictions on the liberty of their people, they go back to the spiritual world and they will continue with their desires of dominance, of ruling all those inferior to them. They consider all those that are under their direction to be inferior to them. So they will look for those that will follow their orders in the spiritual world. And that's what Andre Luiz is having trouble understanding. But we just have to think about us here in the physical world, and those that want to dominate and lead through fear and imposition, they will end up in the spiritual world trying to dominate through fear and imposition also. So Gubbio talks about our own, each one of our own mind, and reminding us that when we are incarnate, we live in a zone of a slower vibration. But our body is made, physical body is made up of trillions of cells, that each one of the cells are microscopic lives to themselves. So we, in the end, when we have a physical body, we are in charge, in a sense, of trillions of cells. That what are these cells? They are the beginning of the spiritual principle into the evolutionary path that will go through what we study as the evolution of the spiritual principle until it goes through all the phases until we become an individual spirit. So our will controls this corpuscles that serve us for a limited time. So he compares to an electrician that connects the power, and it can illuminate a swamp or a tower, right? So what I underline here, if we choose not to use our will, we will invariably be pawns of the predominant circumstance surrounding us. Meaning, if we don't make conscious choices, if we go with the flow, we are going to follow those that seems to us the more appropriate for our personal desires at the moment. So our personal state reflects our inner choices. As soon as we choose to use our will, we must resolve the problem of directing it. Meaning, the thought, something that we discussed here before, the thought is neutral. How we direct the thought is if we are going to give it positive or negative vibrations that will make them go in one way or another. So our will, that is our desire to do something for us, will reflect where we are going to place ourselves. And then he talks about sickness, diseases, right? If we feed the disease, the thought, the sickness thoughts, we're going to enter into affinity with direct those trillions of cells to act. And these microbes that live and reproduce in the mental fields, we'll nurture them, we will associate with others that vibrate at the same level, and will increase the possibility of us having the disease and getting worse from the disease. Of course, he always says we have to consider the necessary trials and atonements that are involved. Not all diseases are caused by our mind and behavior on our present life, but some are necessary trials or atonements from previous existences. But how we face them when we fight bravely against the you, even if it's beneficial and deserved in the sense that is an atonement, we will find resources for God, for the good, and for the assistance of the spiritual benefactors. If we take pleasure, in a sense, in our illness, if we victimize ourselves with our illness, we are going to associate ourselves with the less evolved spirits that are going to feed in this illness thoughts, ill thoughts that we are going to have, and that's going to cause us more harm than beneficial. Okay, I hope you understood this part. It's when he compares our mind and the surrounding minds in the spiritual world, I think, and it brings a little bit of the disease. I don't know, Elmo, if you have something to add here on this part, because I think it comes a little bit on your area. Oh, okay. Anyone else? Okay, so let's continue.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. I found it quite confusing myself and hard to understand the parallel that creates of the each living cell in our body and us. But it seems to me that he's making a step-by-step evolutionary path that start with us making the decision of use our mind and put it to work, and not become just a little, like a little leaf that the wind can take us wherever the wind decides to take us. Because if you do so, we are just like animals, allowing those trillions of minds, little cells, to lead us wherever we want to go. That way, we are very easy prey to those who wants to lead us to one direction or another. And that's the risk that we take, let's say, once we discarnate, end up in the spiritual world, and the spirits wants to take us to those lower zones, will easily take us, because you do not have the habit of making decisions, of taking responsibility for the directions that we lead ourselves. So the first step would be to decide to use our mind. I think he used that to choose to use our mind, use that expression. And then the second is to each direction where you lead our minds towards the lowers or the higher elevations. Once we choose to go into the higher elevations, then we are definitely safe. So it's really an exercise of using our mind. First steps to choose to use our mind, and then to exercise the directions that you want to lead, that our mind will lead us towards the positive or towards the negative?
Actually, yeah, it's exactly that. And actually, that's what Gubbio is going to say next. Exactly what you said. We're going to continue on this discussion of where we place our thoughts. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I was following his explanations and was profoundly edified. And in spite of a lengthy, spontaneous pause, I did not dare interrupt the cause of his argument so as not to break his line of reasoning. The esteemed and worthy Gubbio continued, "Our mind is an entity placed between superior and inferior forces, and its goal is spiritual perfection. Our perispirit, the sublime result of evolution, as well as our physical body, may be compared to the poles of an electrical magnetic device. The incarnate spirit experiences inferior influences to the areas of the sex organs and the abdomen and receives superior stimuli, even if they come from non-sublimated souls, to the heart and brain. When individuals seek to gain control of their will, they choose the company they prefer and set out on the pathway they desire. The lower spheres may be home to millions of primitive influences, even beneath earthly forms, urging us to hold on to emotions and desires and equipping us for momentous falls into the abysses of destructive sentiment, through which we already journeyed many centuries ago. But there are also millions of sanctifying appeals inviting us to ascend towards glorious immortality." The instructor set his piercing and peaceful gaze on us and asked, "Now, do you understand why some spirits choose the dark house of wrongdoing after the grave, just as there are millions of incarnate spirits who, in full harmony with their earthly nature, love to live in the house of infirmity? Entrenched mental attitudes are not easily changed. When unwillingly to abide by the sanctifying principles of the idealistic terrain so that they may inwardly nourish themselves with the task to which they are committed, monarchs who rules over thousands, leaders who are used to imposing iron fist decrees, or persons who are used to others submitting to them do not become humble servants overnight just because they have rid themselves of the burden of their physical selves. If they are not sent to the abysses of insanity in the total eclipse of their reason for indeterminable length of time due to their misuse of their intellect and power, they are retained and respected in the evolutionary endeavor of the world as a result of the appreciable and worthy qualities they have already gained. Although violent passions still characterize their inner life, and they are utilized by higher order spirits in the work of perfecting the planet. Thus, they monitor and readjust the weaker, and in turn, they are monitored and readjusted by the stronger, gradually and imperceptibly converting to the supreme good and accepting the divine plan, whose execution they take part in, which faithfulness and valor. In such a position, they help and are helped. They give and receive, driving progress and progressing in turn.
Okay. So what Gubbio is telling us, continuing the explanation, is that our mind, ourselves, we are, the idea of the devil and the angel whispering our choices to us. That's what he's talking about here, right? So we receive the inferior influences through, we talk about the chakras, the lower chakras, the sex organs and the abdomen, meaning the sexual desires and the desires for eating and those associated with drinking and eating, which are the physical pleasures. But also we receive superior stimuli, which he says, even if they not come if they come from non-sublimated souls, meaning they come from spirits that are like us, but they want to help us. They want us to progress through the chakras of the heart and the brain. And our choices we make our choices. We choose where we are going to go through. So we have this, we make these choices. And it's that the conclusion of what we do with our will. And then that's when he talks about these spirits that are incarnate here, spirits that choose the dark house of the wrongdoing, as are millions of incarnate spirits, that our mind doesn't change. Our mental attitude is not easily to change. So he goes explaining how the processes of the evolution of us as a planet happens. And I was reading about this. I was thinking about On the Way to the Light, we just studied Napoleon, and that as a reincarnation of Julius Caesar, right? So when he talks here, if they are not sent to abysses of insanity in the total eclipse of the reason for an interminable length of time, they are retained and respected in the revolutionary endeavor of the world as a result of the appreciable and worthy qualities they have already gained. That explains why someone famous, a leader like Julius Caesar, reincarnates again as a leader like Napoleon. Although violent passions still characterize their inner life, they are utilized by high order spirits of the work of perfecting the planet. Why? They monitor and readjust the weaker, but in turn they are monitored and readjusted by the stronger, gradually and imperceptibly converting to supreme good. So they are helping, even if it looks in their twisted ways, in the progress of the planet, because you need those that have the spirits that are similar to us in terms of passions, but that have the qualities of leadership and have the qualities of ability to conducting others to make us progress, even if it's still in a twisted way, in a sense. But they help and are helped. They give and receive, driving progress and progress in turn, meaning they are an important part. Even if we fail to recognize some of these leaders in history, important leaders in history, we are sometimes shocked by their abuse of power. They are instruments of the divinity for the progress of humanity as a whole. And we will be able to understand better when we are, studying all of these from the spiritual world without our human passions influencing us. We'll be able to look at this, at the history of the universe in a more impartial way and understand better the necessity of these so-called leaders that took care of the progress of the planet. Okay. Comments, questions here?
If you continue to make analogies of what he's saying in the spiritual world to our lives here also, you can see it starts with if we surrender our ability of make decisions and let our physical body leads us, our physical body is gonna lead us to two things: eat and reproduce. That's why he says that the abdomen and the sex, right? Because that's pretty much to stay at the level of animalia, basically. You protect yourself from the environment, you get enough food, and you are able to perpetuate your own genetic pool, sex, right? And in that state of mind, you want to have more and more and more of this, and that's what leads to the survival of the stronger. The stronger, the one who scream louder, one who hit harder, is one who will gather all the food, that will gather all the women or for sex, and we will have control of, will be a leader. And I think that starts this power struggle, the desire for power. If all I want is food and sex, I'm gonna gather all the food and sex, all the food and all the means of reproduction I can get, and everybody be dependent, be below me. And then I keep thinking in what leads, let's say, a teenager, or so to say, days, to choose to be a gang member, if it's not also to surrender the ability to think and make decisions to someone else. So I want to have a nice game or a nice iPhone or a nice iPad or whatever. And to do that, I would have to work for about a year and a half and save enough money to buy it. And someone comes, why? Come with me. No, join my club. And no, we can get you an iPhone. You can go and steal an iPhone, and in a week, and you can have everything. Why do you have to struggle? Why do you have to sit on a school bench and waste your life when you can get everything that these people are getting with the least effort? And with that state of mind, you become basically a slave of those leaders. And that's what perpetuates what we see in the lower zones today, the fear of the leaders. Once you join those gangs, you're basically enslaved. You can't get out anymore, extremely difficult to get out of it. And it always starts because you surrender your ability of thinking, one, to the physical organism that leads to live in a state of animalia, and two, you choose the path of least resistance, which invariably will allow someone else to control you.
Yeah, very good, Al. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, let's go on.
He paused briefly and then continued in another direction. Such a reality compels us to ponder the extent of spiritual work from every evolutionary angle. Education for life eternal is not limited to the superficial learning that an ordinary person receives after a few years at a university. It is a work of patience that requires centuries. If there are trees that live for hundreds of years to accomplish their purposes, what can be said about the millennia required by one individual for his own sublimation? Thus, we mustn't forget the love we owe to the ignorant, the weak, and the unfortunate. We must walk in the footsteps of those who once extended their compassionate hands to us. The argument was too constructive for us to interrupt with more questions. Rubio took advantage of the chance to explain further. The atoms comprising the Eucharistic host in a church are essentially the same as those comprising the lower, lowly bread in the penitentiary. Hence, all matter per se is passive and pliable. It is the same whether in the hands of the learned or the ignorant, in the hands of loving entities or brutes, in the condensed state known on the earth or in the states known elsewhere. Consequently, we can understand the transitory forms constructed on our plane by individuals who have turned from the good, for those who anesthetize their faculties in the pursuit of fleeting pleasures. A long and painful process of incomprehension follows the separation from the flesh. Concerning the fact that most people pursue the sensations of the physical body, as if the genetic attractions and the frenetic attachment to temporary assets of lowest circles made up their entire happiness in the world. The reaping of an imbalanced personalities is always disquieting because it keeps unaltered the dark ranks of the insensate cultivators of selfish happiness at any price, dangerous lunatics who are willingly controlled by sovereign intelligences specializing in domination, make up dreadful hordes that guard the exits from the lower rims on all sides.
Okay. So here, Gubbio starts to explain why the help is needed and why spiritual assistance is a work that that will help. The reasons why they are going to embark on their journey. So the spiritual work, it's a work of patience that requires centuries, right? And it compares to trees that lives for hundreds of years, and the individual, for his or her own evolution, takes millennia, right? But we owe, as he says here, the love to the ignorant, the weak, and the unfortunate. We must walk in the footsteps of those who once extend their compassionate hands to us, meaning we were helped, we were assisted. It's our duty to provide the help of us and assistance that once we were given. So, and then he says here, when he compares that the atoms are the same in a church and in a penitentiary, the matter is passive and pliable, meaning what we do with it, it's according to our will. So going back to what Elmo was just talking about here, right? The faculties in the pursuit of fleeting pleasures. So for those that spend their physical life in that pursuit, the long and painful process of incomprehension follows the separation from the flesh, meaning when they die, they don't understand what's going on with them, and there is a painful process. And those that continue looking for the sensations of the physical body they just lost, they are going to find themselves unbalanced, and they are risking being prey of those that control here, when they said dangerous lunatics who are willingly controlled by sovereign intelligence, specializing in domination, make up dreadful hordes that guard the exits from the lower realms on all sides. Again, going back to what Luiz and Elmo said about the spirits that come to our mediumship meetings, that sometimes we get the leaders of these lower zones, and they talk about their armies, they talk about their power and how they're going to attack all of us, because that's the only way they know how to behave. That's the only way they know how to exist. So they cannot come to us and accept that there is a need to change, because they don't recognize the need to change. The fact that they are there is an inkling of change already. Otherwise, they wouldn't be brought to our meetings. But they don't recognize that, and it's not going to be in 10, 15 minutes that they're going to change. But the seeds are going to be planted, and the seeds are going to bear fruit eventually, like one that I was having a long discussion this last Monday, right? I told him that, eventually you are going to remember this conversation. It's not going to make any effect now, but eventually what we discussed here is going to stay with you, and you are going to remember that. So that's the reason they come to the meetings, and they are reminded of the need to change, even if they don't accept or recognize it. Okay. Comments?
In that book or tape, João, help me remind the name, the Psychophonic Illuminations or something like that.
Francisco Xavier?
No, it's a collection of messages received by spirits in the meetings in the mediumship meeting with Xavier and his group.
Yeah. I don't remember the type, but I know what you're talking about. There is a DVD.
Psychophonic Illumination, something like that. It's wonderful. It's all taped recordings of some of those meetings of those spirits speaking. There is of Padre Eustáquio, there is one that to me it's very remarkable. It was still very strong in my mind, is the one of Joaquim Silvério. There was one of abolitionists in Brazil, and now trying to free the slaves in Brazil. And he gave a communication saying that he still struggles, he still continues with the same task of freeing his slaves in the spiritual world. That many slaves discarnate end up in the spiritual world, and many slave owners, slave masters discarnate, go back to the spiritual world and continue to be. The slaves continue to be slaves, and the slave owners, the slave masters continue to be so. That to me was a very strong think of how hard it was to liberate ourselves from the thoughts, from what we identify ourselves. I identify myself as a slave, and I go back in the spiritual world and continue to be a slave because I believe that's is what I am. And it's so hard. And one of the problems that we have in our spiritist meeting also is to say, no, you are not. It just was a spirit that is meant to be happy, to be free. You have to get out of that idea. And even for those who are committed to evil, they come and say, we are different. You know, I am from evil and for evil. And to try to break up that self-identity is so hard. And that's what takes so long, centuries, to liberate the spirits from this conditioning where they place themselves.
Yeah, that's true, right? They think they don't deserve better. Yeah. Please?
Yes, I was going to add something in the direction of what Elmo just said. From my personal experience in our center on the mediumship meetings, regarding gang members, we don't see only dangerous lunatics who are willing to be controlled. I note a number of, just weak spirits. They are controlled because they're sort of weak, some by fear, some by, lack of inner strength. So I would not leave the dangerous lunatics, alone there. I think there are other categories of people that are controlled by those sovereign intelligences.
So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, all types, but that willingly submit to the domination of others, right? In a sense. Right?
Okay. Why does God allow such anomaly? Asks William with obvious consternation. Wouldn't a mere order from the Eternal One be enough to cleanse the disharmony? The helpful Gabriel did not make him wait for an answer. Smiling openly, he replied enthusiastically, isn't that like asking why the Lord has waited for us this long? Why we believe in wondrous paradises? Don't we know that each person will either sit on the throne that he or she has crafted or will plunge into the depths of the abyss that he or she wanted? Moreover, we must remember that if the stonecutter uses a rough file to polish the stone, the Lord of the universe uses hardened hearts, temporarily alienated from his word, to perfect the character of the children who have wandered away from his home. The best judge cannot always be the nicest individual. Moral qualities and superior virtues are not mere talk, they are living forces, without which the human spirit cannot evolve. Ordinary people are addicted to the safeguards of external resources, and they focus their best sentiments on them, thereby hanging on to useless fantasies. They consequently imprison their minds in insecurity, fragility, and fear. The shock of death impresses tremendous conflicts on their perispiritual organism, the vehicle intended for their manifestations in the new circle of matter that is different from that than what they were used to. And after they wasted blessed years in the didactic field of the corporeal rim, entangled in deplorable conflicts, they roam about, afflicted, lifeless, and rebellious, and join the first group of wicked spirits that can promise them the continuation of a life of fictitious pleasures. They form enormous groups based on emanations from the earth's surface, where millions of men and women nourish their basest needs. They sustain their temporary collective life by absorbing energies from the homes and the incarnate brothers and sisters, like a large community of criminals living at the expense of a generous herd of cattle. However, we must remember that humans exploit cattle, which are unconscious and incapable of being judged for any wrongdoings, whereas in human spheres, the picture is different. Rational creatures cannot shirk their responsibilities. If persecutors that are visible to earthly eyes form groups for the systematic worship of rebelliousness and selfishness, incarnate humans, masters of valuable patrimonies of sanctifying knowledge, ensure their disgraceful work by continuously running from their divine duties as God's helpers in the area of service where they find themselves, feeding a ruinous alliance, thus sharing the result of destructive indifference or condemnable action. They both reciprocally torment and agitate each other like wild animals that devoured one another in the jungle of life. They mutually obsess one another, whether on or off the instructive pathways of the flesh. Consequently, they spend centuries yoked to one another, bound to lamentable illusions and evil purposes, causing themselves extreme disturbances, since the inheritance of heaven is completely unreachable for all those who scorn the divine seeds they carry within them. There are millions of human souls that have not yet left the surface of the planet, not even after more than 10,000 years. They die in the dense body and we are reborn in it, just like the trees that sprout over and over again because they are deeply rooted in the ground. Individually and collectively, they repeat multi-millennia lessons without discovering the heavenly gifts of which they are the heirs. They deliberately abandon their inner sanctuary on the shifting sand of inconsequential self-worship, from time to time, fighting ruinous wars that reach both planes in a wrongly directed impulse of liberation to abominable crisis of fury and suffering. Consequently, they destroy what they have laboriously built, and they modify the processes of outward life from one civilization to the next.
So here, the obvious question from Eloy: why does God allow this? This is a question we always hear people asking, and sometimes we ask, right? Why does God allow? God doesn't allow anything. There's just the divine justice, the divine law, and if we deviate from the divine law, we face consequences. And Gubbio goes here into a long explanation about the individuals, the spirits that are associating in spiritual gangs, as we used the term before. And he explains that when what I underline there, the best judge cannot always be the nicest individual, in the sense that, if we have a judge has to be just, following his or her beliefs in terms of what is right and what is wrong. And so they cannot be the nicest individual, because if you are too nice, you may allow people to get away with things they shouldn't get away with. It's in that sense, and connecting to what he said before about the leaders that who are needed in this world to make us move forward, that sometimes are leaders full of imperfections and of shortcomings, but they are necessary because that's what we listen to. And then he talks about our need to connect to each other, the spirits that are lost after they lose their physical organism, and because they still need their physical, the things they lost in the physical world, they associate themselves with other spirits that will lead them to connect to the individual's incarnated spirits that will feed their needs. So when we talk about, someone that was an alcoholic here on earth, they will look for spirits, for incarnated people that are drinking, so they can share the alcoholic sensations. For those that are addicted to sex, to food, the same thing, they will look to associate with those. And these are physical needs, but also those that are immersed in hatred, in persecutions, in other forms of destructive thoughts, they will have spirits associating with them, absorbing their energies and feeding their energies, like they say, like a large community of criminals living at the expense of a generous herd of cattle, meaning they feed each other in their inferior desires and inferior tendencies, moving away from their divine path, the teachings of our master. So feeding themselves into this indifference or condemnable action, they are feeding each other, tormenting and agitating each other like wild animals. So again, a lot of explanations why we find ourselves surrounded by these spirits, both in the spiritual world and in the physical world, and the energy emanated from us living beings is sometimes a very dense and dark energy that a lot of spirits feed and try to build on it to cause us harm. Okay? Comments, questions here? Okay, so let's finish this chapter.
Okay. Perceiving the close attention with which we were following what he was saying, the instructor continued after a brief pause. However, in the ebb and flow of many ages, the children of the planet who were attentive to the divine determinations and who remained free of their former slavery to moral poverty returned to the dark environment of the captivity they abandoned in order to help their ignorant and wayward brothers and sisters in the sublime endeavor of compassion. They formed vanguards of Christ at the most diverse points of the globe, and under his guidance, millions of them work in love and selflessness, proceeding, albeit with extreme difficulty, confronting the incendiary and exterminating offensive with the blessings of the heavenly light. The exposition could not have been clearer, but Elio remarked, disconcerted, "Who on earth, our old domicile, could ever imagine that infant life could thus continue to so strange and dreadful?" "Indeed," agreed our guide, "the orthodoxal, however, is usually the corpse of revelation. Thousands of years of theological arguments have clouded the human mind regarding the divine realities. Even so, the individual will continue in the task of self-discovery. In the everyday struggle, the power of the mind is restricted to the narrow circle of selfish personality, like the mollusks chained to the shell. We know that such power, the internal patrimony with which we either sublimate or degrade ourselves, emits creative rays to the passive matter surrounding us, Hence, the direction they take depends on us. If millions of luminous rays form one blazing star, it is only natural the millions of tiny rays of this desperation will form a perfect hell. As heirs of the creative power, we generate energies wherever we may be. Isn't that perfectly intelligible? That is why the Lord ordered his heavenly advice to be put in the divine book. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the living door of the soul, there will be a truly redemptive colloquial between the master and the disciple. The heart is a tabernacle, and the sublimation of the powers that comprise it is the only pathway of access to the higher realms. The devoted guide gave us to understand that he had finished. He smiled benevolently and asked, which of us would be so foolish as to try to fly away in the balloon that is still tied down? The human mind, tied firmly to the strongest earthly interest, offers no other symbol. We fell silent as our thirst for explanation had been quenched. In just a few minutes, we had gathered enough invaluable study material for a long time to come. We walked on in silence, ecstatic before the majestic beauty of the marvelous star-filled night. A gentle breeze whispered wordless songs in the light forage, and groups of friends who passed by us from time to time displayed the same look of happiness that was floating the flowery grove. Thus, bathed in the unforgettable emotion, we walked toward the sanctuary where we will receive instructions for our next task, filled with trust and joy, like jubilant workers walking contently toward the struggle, as if they were happily headed for a festival of light.
Okay, so here Gubbio concludes with the call to action. So that the need to go, as he says, is return to the dark environment in order to help the ignorant and wayward brothers and sisters. So the people that work selflessness, in love and selflessness, with extreme difficulty, because we know that it's hard to work in those places, but there are brothers and sisters working at these places at all times, and that's what they are preparing themselves to do. So Eloy asked again, why this happens, how could this happen? And Gubbio talks about the thousands of years of theological arguments that clouded the human mind regarding the divine realities. It's very interesting, right? We talk about the religious power throughout the centuries that in many cases, and to many of us, blinded us more than helped us. And when we talk about the book that it's going to be the rescue of a former pope, we know that a pope is the leader. The pope is the leader of the church, and a pope that focused on evil is, of course, caused a lot of harm and still causes a lot of harm. So that's what Gubbio is saying here, that we need to work. That's the only way we're going to progress, is by helping those that are being helped up by those that are above us, and helping those that are below us. That's the only way we are going to all progress, according to our limited abilities, of course, but working incessantly to be of assistance to those in need. And in the same sense, we are going to be assisted by those that can help and assist us. Okay? Any final comments, questions here?
Johnny,
Yes.
you should have underlined there's a pearl of a couple of phrases here. You mentioned that, but go back one page, just so that I read in English. Orthodoxy is usually the corpse of revelation. Thousands of years of theological arguments have clouded the human mind. This is a pearl. I'm going to mention this
It
in the
really
class
is.
sometime. Don't you
Yeah.
agree? Come on.
It really is. It really is. And if you
I
see, that's the beauty of doing a study group, because things that pass us by one is captured by another. It's a true power that you have to put in our forehead and never forget.
actually was a conscious choice not to underline.
Come on. I'm reading my book here at the same time. It's already in yellow because this is something to preserve. Sorry about that. I had to comment.
Okay. Yeah, no, but I mentioned that because I thought it was very important part of it. But and in the end, it's the book, right? It's Gregorio, right? That's what we're going to look at. Yeah. Thanks. Yes. Thanks, Luis, Elmo. So next chapter we start the journey, but still not there. Of course, this in the books of Andre Luiz, it takes a while for us to get where we are. But in this book starts very early, the journey to the main part of the book. In some other books, it takes forever to arrive at the main target. But this book, it gets quicker there. Okay, so before we ask for the final prayer, just a reminder: tomorrow we are going to have our online meeting. On the 12th, we are reopening the center for fraternal assistance and a small reading of a book and a comment, and then the passes. The workers are all vaccinated, and we are following CDC instructions, so we may be wearing masks if that's the guideline with the new variant. But we are reopening on the 12th. Tomorrow we are closed, of course, as the long weekend. And this coming weekend we have the family retreat. You still have time. You can participate online. You can enroll. You can participate. On Saturday afternoon we have a presential meeting in the park. All the information on our email, and if you need any more information, you can ask us. We have 9 different states having meetings in different parks, which is very interesting, and even outside here, I think. Sunday will be the second Sunday of the month. We'll be studying the Gospel according to Spiritism. Okay, and we are going to ask Carol to do our final prayer now.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Elmo. Thank you, Luis, and everyone. Infinite Creator, Supreme Intelligence, and First Cause, we are grateful today to be together for our study of the book entitled Liberation. We are grateful that we can share in our thoughts and our discussions in a unified way to reconnect with each other again and to continue with these studies each week. We have learned that inferior spirits can join in the colonies above the earth. This means that this can bring the vibration down into the incarnates and disincarnates. It can bring the vibrational level to a much more dense and almost very despicable vibration. This brings down the mental vibration in general of the planet, and inferior spirits will want to gain power, continuing this power over us. As we have a choice, we can always ask for assistance There is a need, though, however, for us to engage our will, to engage our intelligence, to ask for this assistance. We will find out where our mind really takes us as we disincarnate. We know that in the spiritual world, there may be a time of transition and confusion, and this is a very vulnerable time for us as a spirit. We continue to realize that orthodoxy in the past had a very strong but very clouded effect on progress. This now, through Spiritism, we can unveil, and we can hopefully open more pathways to self-discovery and progress. We are grateful for the guidance of our spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, the mentors who are with us, who are here today to show us the way as we do our part. We are never alone, and we can reach out, but we must engage our will and our intent to do so. We humbly ask for safety and protection as we go forth to family, friends, loved ones, and co-workers. May we continue with our prayers, with our studies, and our mindfulness throughout the week. We wish to always continue to try to elevate our thoughts, go forth to the higher roads in this life. We have great opportunities to do so, for we have the knowledge through our studies to do this. We ask now to receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us, to guide us, to help us, to inspire us, that we may be more loving, we may be more mindful, that we also may listen more intently to others, especially those near and dear to us, our family members especially. And we close now, and we go forth and remind ourselves to be beacons of light. Go forth now in peace, so be it.